You see, there are philosophers who try to explain to you, and then there's Jacques Lacan, who tries to convince you that you don't actually know who you is. Not in a motivational way, not in a self-help way, in a destabilizing, slightly theatrical, almost smug way. Lacan once said, the unconscious is structured like a language, which sounds poetic until you realize what he's implying. That your deepest desires, fears, impulses, the things you swear are authentically yours, might just be grammar, syntax, borrowed words. You think you're original, he thinks you're quoting something. And the most uncomfortable part? He might be right. Lacan didn't just reinterpret Freud, he rewired psychoanalysis into something colder, sharper, almost architectural. He built a theory of the self where the ego is a misunderstanding. And somehow, he delivered all of this in seminars that felt less like therapy lectures and more like intellectual performance art. People left confused, mesmerized, annoyed, devoted, which is kind of the perfect Lacanian outcome. You can't approach Lacan like a normal thinker. If you try to read him the way you read a tidy philosopher, argument, evidence, conclusion, you will drown. He wrote in spirals. He lectured in riddles. He revised himself constantly. He once dissolved his own psychoanalytic school because he didn't like how it was being run. That's not just ego, that's theatrical control. And here's the tension. Was he clarifying Freud for a new century? Or was he building an intellectual maze where only he knew the exits? That ambiguity is part of his brand, and part of why we're still talking about him. Jacques Lacan was born in 1901 in Paris, middle-class Catholic family, educated, structured upbringing. He studied medicine and specialized in psychiatry. In the 1930s, he entered the psychoanalytic world deeply influenced by Sigmund Freud. But Lacan wasn't content with practicing analysis quietly. He gravitated toward avant-garde circles, surrealists, artists, intellectuals. He attended salons. He absorbed structuralism before it had a name. His doctoral thesis in 1932 focused on paranoia, specifically a case study of a woman he called Amy. Even early on, he was fascinated by how identity fractures. He wasn't an outsider in the sense of exclusion. He was inside institutions, but constantly pushing against their boundaries. Charismatic, difficult, precise. He cultivated mystique deliberately. Mid-20th century France was competitive in a very specific way. Intellectuals were celebrities. Philosophy wasn't niche. It was cultural currency. Post-war Paris buzzed with existentialism, structuralism, Marxism, psychoanalysis. Cafes were battlegrounds of interpretation. Freud's ideas had arrived decades earlier, but Lacan argued they had been diluted, especially in American ego psychology, which focused on strengthening the ego. Lacan thought that was a misunderstanding. For him, the ego wasn't something to strengthen. It was something to question. In 1953, he began delivering weekly seminars that would continue for nearly 3 decades. These weren't tidy lectures. They were performances, dense, elliptical, referencing linguistics, topology, literature, math. He insisted on returning to Freud, but through structural linguistics, particularly Ferdinand de Saussure. That's where things get strange, because Lacan didn't treat the unconscious like a basement of hidden instincts. He treated it like a system of signs. One of Lacan's most famous ideas is the mirror stage. Imagine a child between 6 and 18 months old seeing their reflection and recognizing it as me. Lacan argues that this recognition is actually a misrecognition. The image in the mirror is coherent, unified, stable. The child's internal experience? Fragmented, chaotic, sensory. So, the child identifies with an image that feels more whole than their actual lived experience. That's the birth of the ego. Which means, according to Lacan, your sense of self begins as a mistake. You fall in love with a reflection, and you spend the rest of your life trying to live up to it. He extends this idea into 3 registers: the imaginary, the symbolic, and the real. The imaginary is images and identification. The symbolic is language and social structure. The real is what resists symbolization, the unspeakable rapture. It sounds abstract, but what he's saying is simple and terrifying. You don't own your identity, language does. The audacity of telling people their ego is basically a glitch. That's not a soft insight. That's like telling someone their personality is a formatting error. And he delivered this in packed seminar rooms where students were scribbling like it was gospel. Part of me wonders, did they fully understand him? Or did they fall under the performance? Because Lacan had presence. He cut sessions short abruptly. He controlled time itself in the room. Analysts called it variable length sessions. You think therapy is structured. He turned it into rhythm. There's genius in that. There's also manipulation energy. And maybe that ambiguity is the point. Lacan's central fixation was language. The unconscious is structured like a language. He meant that desires aren't raw impulses, they're shaped by words, by cultural symbols, by what is sayable. We don't just want things, we want what we think we're supposed to want. Desire is mediated. He reinterpreted Freud's slips of the tongue not as accidents, but as structural clues, disruptions in speech revealing deeper patterns. What was at stake? The authority of psychoanalysis. Lacan's approach alienated many in the psychoanalytic establishment. In 1963, the International Psychoanalytic Association removed him from its list of training analysts due to disagreements about his methods. He responded by founding his own school. He didn't soften, he doubled down. The tension between intention and outcome is sharp here. He wanted clarity about Freud. He created something far more complex. Lacan lingers because he refuses comfort. He doesn't tell you to be authentic. He questions whether authenticity is even accessible. Psychologically, that's unsettling. Emotionally, it's destabilizing. Socially, it exposes how much of our identity is performance. He makes you aware of how much you're spoken by language rather than speaking freely. That awareness sticks like an itch you can't scratch. You can disagree with him, but once you've heard the mirror stage argument, it's hard not to see it everywhere. Selfies, curated personas, filtered lives. If Lacan were alive now, he would probably have opinions about Instagram. The mirror stage is basically a pre-digital theory of self-curation. You construct an image. You identify with it. You chase coherence. Social media amplifies that loop. The symbolic order, language, norms, social rules have never been louder. Desire circulates algorithmically. You think you want something, but the want was structure for you. Lacan feels disturbingly contemporary, not because he predicted the internet, but because he understood how fragile the self is under the pressure of representation. What I find complicated about Lacan is the ego question. He critiqued ego, but he had a formidable one. He controlled institutions, dissolved schools, reframed traditions. There's something almost theatrical about dismantling the self while cultivating your own myth. But maybe that contradiction is honest. Maybe you can't desist identity without being entangled to it. He didn't offer therapy that made people feel stable. He offered analysis that made people aware. And awareness isn't soothing. It's sharp. Lacan cracks the illusion that self-knowledge is straightforward. He suggests that even when you introspect, you're navigating symbols. The real you might not be fully articulable. That's not nihilism, it's humility, and it leaves you slightly off balance. Because if identity is structured by language and images, then certainty becomes provisional. You're less solid than you thought, but maybe more interesting. Jacques Lacan didn't give us a clear mirror. He showed us that the mirror was never neutral. And once you notice that, your reflection starts looking back a little differently.